Hello everyone and welcome to Fix My Track episode 2. We'll be looking at a new track today, whole new track that as I would like to remind you guys, this is all based on your participation on tracks that you sent in and that you want to see reviewed, to get a bit more feedback on. You know, those little things that you're not really sure need to be tweaked. I'll probably gonna come in and give you some ideas, some pointers on how to just get it sounding a bit more finessed. So let's look at today's tracks. So today we have a track that was sent by Briffeiro. So thank you a lot for sending your track in. Let's have a quick listen to it. So yeah, let's jump into Ableton straight away. So this is it's almost like a 5.5 minute long melodic techno track. I suppose that we could have a listen probably from the last break onwards. So let's just to have a general idea of what we'll be dealing with today. So yeah, sounding great, really cool track, banging track. Again, really excited to see the quality of tracks that you guys are sending in. So and also to remind everyone that you can just check the link in the description. You'll have the instructions on how to get to us and how to send in your tracks. So this is what Briffeiro has done, and yeah, so everything is sounding great. But one of the things that I think draws my attention first and foremost is how hot the track is running in. So if we have a look here, let's go back into Ableton right now, and if we look here, I'm just going to tap into this other side here where we see Ableton's mixer, and if we look at the channel, so there's no clipping occurred, so nothing is going into the red apart from the main. So let me just first of all drop this where there's more things going on. So on the drop, so none of the individual tracks are actually clipping, but if you look at the main, so this is where all of the signals, so all of the channels are eventually routed onto the main, and when they meet at the main, the sum of these tracks is clipping, right? So this is one of the things that we need to consider first and foremost for good practice is our headroom. So the first thing I'm going to do is just grab all of the channels, right? And so I'm going to maintain the balance between the tracks, which I feel like it's a good draft. I think the balances are nearly there. I might do a few things to also tweak and perfect that balance, but just to maintain the same thing, the quickest way to achieve this, and this is because there is no track volume automation going on, otherwise this would be a mess, but because there's none of that yet, we can just grab all of the tracks and drop them down by a few dB. So this is what you kind of want to aim for. So roughly, let me just zoom in here a little bit. So this zoom of the track faders will give us a better notion of where we are in terms of our metering. So what we want when we look at the main here is to aim roughly for around -6 for our peaks, right? So that is the ideal scenario that we're looking at. This will give us plenty of headroom for then when we get to the mastering stage, we have a little bit of of signal to work with. Otherwise, we're already too close to clipping, so everything's going to sound distorted. And yeah, that's just not ideal. So for good practice, remember, keep your peaks on the main at -6. So this will, it's a little bit conservative, I know, when you want a loud mix, but trust me, less is more when it comes to loudness on the mixing stage. So you want to give yourself a little bit more headroom so you can then work on your loudness a little bit later on. And I think that I can also, just again, for good practice, just come here to the main. I'm just going to drop a limiter. So I'm going to search for a limiter here. I'm loving Ableton's new limiter, so I'm going to put this right here. So, and yeah, cool. And if we want a bit more loudness to kind of give us a notion of where things will be on the mastering stage, we can now crank up the input gain a little bit. So this number here, this is showing us how much gain reduction is occurring on the peak, so how much we're limiting on the peaks. So what you want, I suppose, if you're still mixing, if you're still not in the mastering stage, you either leave this untouched, or you can just crank this up till you see like 1 dB or even less of gain reduction. This will give you a good starting point. So you'll be preventing, because you have the limiter on your master, this will prevent anything goes above. So here by default it's set to minus 0.3. I think this is a good starting point, or you can even drop this down to, suppose, yeah, minus 0.2. And yeah, so this will again optimize our signal flow, optimize our headroom, and all of what's called gain staging. We're making sure that all of our gains, meaning volumes, are set to a healthy level. Right, now that we have that tackle, let's move on to something else. I suppose that we can also work a little bit on the balance of a couple of things here. Let's look at a few of the parts that are in this production. So we have this main sort of arpeggiated synth. Which should have a bit of highlight. Then we have a kick, right? 4 on the floor. And this is one of the things that I've noticed. I've already rearranged the track order here, and I feel like this, again, is an important thing that also matters when you're producing and mixing, which is having a logical track order, meaning that you want to have things that are sort of like in the same family of sounds, of instruments, closer together. And the reason why is I think it's just ease of navigation, just to make sure that we can, whenever we find a problem, like for instance the fact that we have a few loops layered in, then maybe they might be interfering with each other. And the idea when we're putting layers together, especially with drums, you want to make sure that the role that they're playing is not interfering with the other parts. Let me show you this in a bit more detail here. So I feel like the main sort of kick, right, should dominate, right? And if we sum these two together, we're probably going to have an excess of low end. And there's two things that we can kind of go about this. I suppose that one of the things that we could do is we could just quickly add an EQ. Let's go for EQ8 and probably filter out a little bit of the low end on this loop, which is where most of the energy of the kick drum present in this loop, because obviously we cannot separate, we cannot isolate the kick on this particular loop, but we can maybe make way for this the main kick to shine through and not compete with this other one, right? So we could just grab a high pass filter and filter out a little bit of the lows. And on top of that, if we want, we can also allow for a little bit of sidechain compression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my kick drum. Again, track labeling is another aspect which I consider to be important. Again, it's accessory to creativity, but it will be a huge time saver on the long run. So what I'm going to do here is just label this track kick, so I know what I'm dealing here with. And now, for instance, as I'm trying to find my source input for the sidechain compression, it will be easier to find on this drop-down list. There we go, there's a kick. So we can now determine how much we want this loop to be ducked. when this other kick comes in, it will make everything sort of go down in level, so what's called ducking. So just to compare, see a bit more clarity, a bit more precision for our main kick, which is now not interfering with the kick drum that was present on the loop. So same thing here. And I'm going to just be a little, not necessarily lazy, but because I've already done this, I'm going to just copy this processing. So I just highlighted these two effects, Command C. If you're on a PC, that will be Control C. And I'm going to paste this here on this other loop, and I'll probably readjust some of these settings. There we go. Maybe a quicker release so it doesn't stay compressed that long. Cool. And this will probably even allow me to bring up this sound, all the other sounds that are present in this loop, for instance, the hi-hats and all of the other percussive elements. So I can now maybe even have this a little bit louder. There's a third one, same thing. There we go. And I also feel like it's important to, this is again for ease of navigation, I'm going to just color these in a familiar color to me. So for me, I know it's controversial, but my drums tend to be green. And so I'll put all of these in the same color. I think there's still a couple of other, yeah, these are also drums. Let me just put these closer together. This takes a minute, but it will save me time in the future. That is also a snare roll. Putting all those there, and again, just gonna color them very quickly, highlighting all the tracks, giving them a color, and then also doing assign track color to clips, so the clips match the color in our tracks. To me, it just makes a bit more sense, and also grouping all of these together, so highlighting all of the tracks, Command G, well, that will be Control G to group tracks together. Gonna give this a name, and there we go. Cool. So we have our drums here. Now we can just solo this group, hear how it's sounding like. So this now allows me to separate the roles that these drums are performing in this track, rather than having, 4 or 5 different kick drums being put together, and maybe the low end kind of lacks precision because of that, because all of those layers put together sometimes, because of the fact that they might be in different pitches, different lengths. So because of that, I feel like we lose a little bit of what we have now. I think we have salvaged a little bit of that weight and presence of the main kick drum, and it's not competing with all the other ones present in the loops. And we can now, for instance, even highlight certain things, let's say with EQ, which I feel could be promoted in higher ranges. Let's say, for instance, I think there's, see this backbeat sort of hi-hat has a lot of shine here around 7K. I can bring that a little bit louder in the mix. And also this clap could come up a little bit. A tiny bit of reverb doesn't hurt also, just to give it a sense of space, and also just to prolong it a little bit, elongate that sound with reverb. So reverb kind of has those two main functions, I suppose, which is, in a way, give a sense of space, but because there is a length, right, a decay as it's called on the reverb, that decay is also going to help the snare not to be that dry and sterile. Maybe this is a good way to just bring it in and gel it a little bit better with the mix. Cool. As far as drums are concerned, I feel like that is sounding a lot tighter to me. Okay, so the second thing that I would pay attention to here is the bass, right? So I think for sort of like halfway through the song, or actually 2/3 of the song, there's only one bass line coming in. And whenever we're creating more than one bass, or we're putting two basses together, we're layering them essentially, sometimes we run into the issue of having, again, because it's a low-end based sound, and having more than one sometimes might end up in a bit of a soupy mess that we might want to somehow make a little bit clearer, right? So let's see how we can do that. So if we look at the previous drop, all that we were hearing, and let's just look a little bit into the theory of this. I'm just going to bring in MIDI monitor so you guys can see here. So this is pretty much just a C, and if my ears don't deceive me, this is in C minor. So these are the notes that we can actually play within this specific key, the specific scale. So it's only playing that. But when we get to this part here, right, so we have two bass lines. I suppose this is the other one. So let me actually put this closer again for the same argument, just to make things sort of visually more organized, right? So to me, I know this is very controversial, but my basses, I like to color them red. Just a quick way for me to identify where they are in my project. So here, what I'm going to do is consider what these two bass lines are doing. So on the first one, we still have, I suppose, the long notes, right? So that's just the C being repeated over and over again. Whereas this bass loop that comes in, it's a more melodic bass line, comprised of 4 notes. So let's see. So that's, I think that's what's being played. So that's C, G sharp, F, and G. Yeah, there we go. Then down to F and back up to G. So what we want is, I think, if we want to keep these two basses, we have to lock in these two bass lines. So instead of what's happening right now, which is the top one always being the same note, we need to also change it, right? So let's go into the MIDI clip. I'm going to just cut this because I think this keeps repeating. So again, we're going to, suppose we could go higher. So let me just jump up an octave. So shift up arrow and then down to F. Actually, let's go up to F. And I'll explain why I'm going up rather than down in a second. You'll hear my reasoning for that. And then the last one was, sorry, this was a G sharp. So we can actually tell Ableton which scale we're working on. So this was on scale mode, but this was not in the right scale here for our global key. So it's C major, actually C minor. So this will show us which notes are being played, or which notes are part of the scale with the highlight scale feature here. So this is going to go up to, yeah, G sharp or A flat in this case. Then F, and then up to G again. So let's hear that. So let's see if I were to, let's say on the second note, if I were to add this on the lower octave. So the reason that we're doing this is if I were to add the lower, it's essentially we're playing the same note. So the chances of it just sounding a little bit too boomy, right? So there's an excess of low end essentially. We're not going to have that much separation. So the layering doesn't really work. We would be better off not having this bass line, or just having, you know, the looped one and not the MIDI one. So I think that the reason that we should keep this is if we have them octaves apart, right? So they're operating on 2 different octaves, if that makes sense. So See how much more sort of clearer that sounds. Actually, it goes back up to... Oh, actually, there's a higher note here towards the end, which is... So it only goes up to B flat. There we go. So that's actually the bass line. So I guess I'm also going to transpose the C1 to a C2. Yeah, there we go. Cool. See how much more clearer that sounds now. I would maybe, because it's bringing in a lot of higher overtones. So here on the filter on this instrument, we can close it a little bit. And if we somehow want to give the same movement, I suppose we can also add an arpeggiator. So I think this will make the bass line even a little bit tighter. So I think the rate that the this bass is going at is 16th notes. You can actually try and mimic what the other one is doing. So gate will determine the length of these notes. And if we do 2 steps, this is going to do the arpeggiated sequence with 2 octaves rather than 1. So it could be cool. Let's hear this in context. So now it's a matter of personal taste, really, because I kind of like 3 steps. So instead of going between, just like repeating the same note with, no steps, or actually with 1 step, 2 steps will do it across 2 octaves, and 3, as you can imagine, is going to cover 3 octaves. I kind of like what this is doing. I think it's adding to the other bass line. So we could determine this and just go kind of sort of very similar. It might even be cool to sort of like keep the first 2 runs at a specific rate. Let's say we start at 2 steps, and then when we get to halfway through, to increase the movement, we increase this to 3. I think that will be pretty cool. So coming from this, so it's also a matter of, as the track develops, we have a bit more of this bass line, more movement, more notes, more everything. You kind of want the crescendo to keep going up. So yeah, you're just building up the energy essentially. So that is that as far as the bass line goes. So I feel like for the rest of the track, I would maybe actually, in my personal opinion, introduce this a little bit earlier, because I suppose for the first 2 drops, this is pretty sort of samey. So let me just... I think we could also automate this arpeggiator to only come in for the last drop. So I'm going to automate the device on for this drop here. But for the rest of the track, essentially, and I suppose that now we would need to open up the filter here. So in my opinion, I think the arpeggiator could come in, let's say, halfway through this first drop. Again, for the same reason, essentially, which is giving this a bit more motion. So I would maybe have the arpeggiator go on at this point here. All right, let's maybe do that. And also let's automate the filter on this to have it sort of closed or a bit more filtered. And maybe at this point we can just do one step. So let's show the automation for this parameter and move it down to, yeah, there we go. Cool, keeping it nice and tight. And see how that transitions from a simpler bass line. Actually, let me just have it come in at this point here. So I think it will make sense after this little break that you have going on here. So after that drum roll, and also let's have the frequency of the filter automated in a smoother way. Oh, okay, I see. And there we go. Do a little stop right before that. So I feel like that could be introduced a lot sooner in the track, in my personal opinion. Apart from that, there's one last thing that I would like to cover that I feel like could be improved, which is this very sort of driving element in your track, which is the arpeggiator, right? So it's pretty much a loop that kind of carries on throughout the track. So it's, in a way, its importance is crucial, right? But because it's a loop that keeps sort of like recurrently doing the same thing, our ears might get tired of it because it's always, you know, just the very same sort of hypnotic element, which in a way is important. But if we introduce some changes over time, then maybe we can make it a bit more interesting. So I prepared a couple of things that we could consider, right? And here are some effects, right? So I have a utility, a gate, a filter, and a reverb, right? So things that we could maybe play around with to change how the sound kind of behaves over time. And maybe that will be enough to keep us hooked to the sound. So we'll still have the same, the melody will be the same, but because the sound changes a little bit over time, that will, as a listener, keep you a bit more intrigued and a bit more sort of drawn to it. So let's see what this could mean. So let's start with reverb. So this is one kind of popular trick, which is changing sort of the notion of distance by increasing or decreasing the amount of reverb on a sound. So what I would do here, for instance, for the beginning of this track, we could have sort of this sound coming from the distance by having more reverb. So we can even have it sort of all the way to 100% and then automate this to then reduce as the track develops. So let's see what this could sound like. And then maybe when the drums come in, we could sort of drastically kill that reverb. See, the difference that made was that it kind of shifted our perception of placement of that sound in our mix, almost like in a 3D way. So it felt like it was at the back of the room, so to speak, and then when it comes in, it has a bit more impact because as it becomes a little bit drier, we just really feel it in our faces. So we just changed sort of the localization of that sound, if you will. Let's play with another concept here. So, my bad, sorry. So I would even maybe play around with another concept, so which might be interesting to you guys, which is when you have a pre-made loop. Let's say that it comes with effects, right, like this one. So there's a bit of reverb. So although we've exaggerated this added reverb, there is still a sense of it being a little bit of that in there. So you're thinking, well, I have to live with that reverb. There's no way that I can get rid of it. But if you think about it, we can use a gate as a way to remove a little bit of that reverb if we want to. Let's see how that could be achieved. So I'm going to turn on this gate here and just going to bring in the threshold. Right, so you can tweak how kind of it falls below the threshold. So I think that could be cool, even as a contrasting thing. Let's see. See, by automating the floor, essentially we're telling how much we want to be reduced with the gate. So we're considering the tail, so the end of this sound is going to now be cut out a little bit. So we can shape the tail of our sounds with a gate. So not a lot of people consider using a gate for this purpose, but this is one of the things that you could do. And obviously there are sort of more traditional approaches to automation, which would be filtering. I think that could be a cool thing to explore as well. Let's say when we go out of this break here, and by the way, let me just bring the floor back to where it was. So this will essentially, by turning the floor all the way down to -0, it's not going to be doing any gating. And here's how I really like to use auto filter. Instead of, as I was doing here, drawing in the automation either with a pencil tool or manually creating nodes, I like to do this in a more intuitive way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to enable these two parameters here. So this will allow me to now draw in my automation in real time. So I'm even going to use my mouse. I could map this to a MIDI controller if I wanted to, right? I could just very easily go here, MIDI, frequency, and then map this to, let's say, this controller. Yeah, let's do it. That sounds a bit more fun, right? I can actually do this, yeah, on the fly and record that automation. So let's see how that is achieved. And as you can imagine, we can do this with any other parameter. We can map this here. Let's do the bit of reverb as well. We can combine these aspects. Let me just map this other parameter to another MIDI knob on my MIDI controller. And now let's do that as well quickly. See, the loop was the same, right? So it just keeps repeating that very sort of, as I said, hypnotic and very, just really reels you in, doesn't it? But this is just a way to give it a bit more life. And another thing that we could do as well, so this is the last thing that I'm going to show you, is the utility. So we can also play around with mono versus stereo, right? So with the width here, a lot of people use this to increase the width, but you can also decrease the width, right? So let me show you what that is here. Let's see on this other drop. So we can start with having this parameter here at the second break. We make this a lot more mono. Sorry. And then we gradually increase it. And we could combine that with, let's say, with the filter automation that we did here. So again, really like this automation. I can just very easily highlight this bit, Command C, Command V on the second break. So now we have this gradually becoming wider and wider. There we go. Cool. So so I think these are just a couple of ideas that could elevate your track to the next level. And yeah, again, as a starting point, it's sounding really, really cool. Hope these tweaks, these little fixes can help you, finish your track. And yeah, this is it for episode 2. Remember, guys, you can keep sending your projects, and we will consider them for future episodes. So that is all for today. Signing off. Take care, everyone.